attempt to mislead this committee. You claim that at no time did you feel that Catherine Zappone was lobbying for a job, yet it's abundantly clear that Ms Zappone not only sought a plum position that would grant her to access to the UN, but she undertook a campaign to lobby for that position. Minister, she lobbied you, she lobbied Minister Paschal Donoghue, she lobbied the Taoiseach Leo Varadkar, she even lobbied senior diplomats such as the Irish ambassador to the UN, Geraldine Byrne, and you and your ministerial colleagues delivered for her. And what has been revealed, Minister, is nothing more than plain old-fashioned political strokes, which, when uncovered, led to a scramble for cover by you, your officials, and indeed other ministers, deleting messages, changing stories, changing your narrative, providing misleading statements as you did last week, which has ultimately taken us to where we are now. Minister, you sought to downplay your role in the entire process, the knowledge that other senior Fine Gael people had, such as Paschal Donoghue, where it's evidently clear now, knew exactly what was going on around this appointment at least 4 months before Cabinet, and with the Taoiseach at least 11 days before the Cabinet meeting. Minister, as I said, you misled the committee last week when you said clearly that you did not relay anything to Catherine Zappone because I did not speak to her when she was in Dublin. And also that in and around the February 21st was the last time that you spoke to Ms Zappone, and you essentially left the entire process up to your officials at that point. And the published data now graphically shows in an entirely different story to the yarn that you've tried to spin, not just to the committee members, but the public as a whole. So I've a number of questions now I want to put to you, and I just want to follow up on that initial point there, just on the cooling off period, which I think is very important, because in your evidence last week, Minister, you stated that in a conversation you had with Catherine Zappone last summer, that she had offered her services in a private or professional capacity to your department, to you, and the work you are doing at a UN level. So again, I put that question to you. What exactly you done at that point in terms of challenging Catherine Zappone, in terms of the lobbying, in terms of the legislation and the requirement for cooling off? Did you point out at that stage that that was a breach of the legislation, Minister?
Thanks, Deputy Minister.
No, I didn't. Because
okay, no, that's fine, Minister. So you didn't challenge her at that point that she was breaching the legislation and offering her services in either a private or professional.
Deputy, as I said previously,
Minister, I'll move on. Last week, you stated that you had a conversation in and around the 21st of February when you spoke to Catherine Zappone. The release data now shows that it was actually a text message from Catherine Zappone on the 22nd of February. And that also stated in that text message from Catherine Zappone that you had spoken to Paschal Donoghue. She says, I know Paschal has spoken with you about my interest. So can I ask, when did you speak to Paschal Donoghue, and what records are there of that conversation?
Minister, please.
Yeah, I had an informal conversation with Paschal Donoghue in late January, early February, from recollection. The only content of that conversation was that Paschal said that I may get contact from Catherine Zappone with a view to taking advice in relation to work in the UN in New York. That was it.
Okay, was that a phone conversation or was that via text?
It was a phone conversation.
Phone conversation, and there's no records of that conversation taking place anywhere, Minister, is there?
There isn't. I don't even recall the exact date, but it was early in the new year.
On the 24th of February then, Minister, you had a meeting with your Secretary General, Niall Burgess, and you said at the tail end of that meeting, you posed this prospect of the creation of a role with the Secretary General. Are there any records of that conversation?
No, there aren't. There are records of the meeting.
Are there any text messages between yourself and the Secretary General?
It was as I explained last week. It was a conversation in person that I had at the end of a meeting that I had scheduled with Niall Burgess to talk about the appointment of ambassadors and to talk about our first 2 months in the Security Council. At the end of that meeting, I had a brief exchange on this issue. Niall Burgess responded positively to it.
Okay, so there's no records of that conversation. So it wasn't done in a formal capacity. It was an ad hoc approach.
An informal conversation, which wouldn't be unusual. The Secretary General's office is below my office. I often speak to him in the evening.
Okay, thanks, Minister. Then on the 26th, the records show that you had another phone conversation with Catherine Zappone. And what was the nature of that conversation?
So that was the first phone call I had with Catherine Zappone since the end of the previous summer. She texted. I had a missed phone call from her on the 26th, which is on the record, and I responded to that. I rang her back, and I had a conversation with her to relay first of all, to say that I had no introduction to US aid, but secondly, that I had a conversation with the Secretary General as to whether Catherine could be of assistance to our team in New York, but we didn't have anything further on it. She responds to me by text to say thank you for the call, and she effectively outlines her own CV and then asks me if there's anything else I need to know.
Thank you. 1 minute, Deputy Brady, please.
Following that conversation you had with Catherine Zappone, did you speak to Paschal Donoghue at any point following that conversation on the 26th? No. Okay. Minister, on the 4th of March, there's a text then from Catherine Zappone stating that she thanking you so much for offering me this incredible opportunity. It will be such a privilege, and I will be so proud to serve Ireland again. What did you offer her? That was a job offer. And it's quite unbelievable that you offered that position to Catherine Zappone, and then on the 23rd there was internal emails within your department to go and try create some sort of UN envoy position around human rights. So what you offered Catherine Zappone a job on the 4th, in and around the 4th of March. Would I be right in saying that?
Brief response from the Minister, please.
Yeah. No, you wouldn't be right, Deputy. And I've outlined the sequence of events as to what happened there. After the conversation on the 26th, Niall Burgess came back to me and told me that the US was developing a special envoy role in the area of LGBT plus promotion, and that he wanted to develop... Please let me finish, Deputy. Chair, I'd like the opportunity to finish.
Deputy Brady, please, the time has been exhausted.
I think it's important because I think what you're trying to do now, you're trying to fix the documents to fit a wholly unbelievable narrative. This job was offered, it was accepted. The department only then at that point said about...
Deputy Brady, please, the time slot has been exhausted.
One final question, Chair, and I
Deputy,
think
that's an interpretation that you're trying to put on it.
The text communication on the 19th of July, where a critical intervention...
I remind Deputy Brady, please.
Lobby from the Taoiseach. The Minister then phoned Catherine Zappone when she was in Dublin, also phoned the Secretary General to set up a critical meeting where the terms were agreed.
I asked Deputy Brady, please. I asked Deputy Brady for the third time, please.
And the Secretary General, and the duration of the contract was also agreed. So, Minister,
I remind Deputy Brady, we agreed the time slots. In fairness to other members, Deputy Brady, please.
Intervened. So, Minister, I put it to you that your critical intervention at that stage, following lobbying, was instrumental in terms of getting this over the line. Would I be right in saying that?
No, you wouldn't, Deputy, and you're trying to infer a whole series of political charges there that simply aren't true.
Minister, you misled the committee. You said
okay, thank you, Minister. Please, we're moving on to Senator Joe O'Reilly.
So on the 19th of July, you had a critical intervention at that stage.
Deputy Brady.
You phoned Catherine Zappone and you phoned the Secretary General to finalise the details of the contract.
Thank you.
I ask you again, Deputy Brady, please to abide by the agreement in respect of the format of the meeting and the process. Deputy Circuit Clerk, please. Deputy Clerk, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Minister, again this morning. Minister, it's clear you offered Catherine Zappone the job as UN Special Envoy in March, very early March. And what's also clear, and you've acknowledged the same, is that you knew Catherine Zappone wanted the role in the UN, and you made that happen. You made that happen for a friend. It's clear Ms Zappone wrote the job description and that the terms of employment was attached to it. That left your department justifying why the appointment was made. And that, Minister, is absolutely disgraceful. On July 30th, you told National Radio that the job wasn't made for her. However, the documents released yesterday tell a vastly different story, because the reality is that she wrote the job spec, she influenced the duration of the role, and when the brief came to be finalised, Catherine Zappone herself literally submitted her own brief and told you by text that a concept note was being developed. You also said in the media that Fine Gael ministers knew nothing of the appointment until 20 minutes before the Cabinet meeting. That's also not true, Minister, because we now know that the Taoiseach knew 11 days beforehand and Paschal Donoghue much, much earlier. So, Minister, I'm going to put it to you that you misled Cabinet. You've misled this committee through an extreme economy of truths. Now, what I also want to put to you, Minister, is this. You are not truthful then, and you are not being entirely truthful now, despite being given 2 opportunities by this committee to do so. And as a member of this committee, I am deeply concerned that any minister would seek to use this committee in what appears to be an effort to save his own political neck, because that reeks of the sense of entitlement that has brought us here today. Now, what I will also move on to is this. There has been a lot of communication released, communication traffic between Catherine Zappone and key players, and her access that she had to you, your department, cabinet and government. There was pressurising. Now, you can deny it, but repeated messages in my world is pressurising and pushing for this job to such an extent that when she wasn't getting the response that she wanted, she approached our UN or rep in the UN and raised it before months before the government knew. We know that Catherine Zappone had direct access, that she used that access to you, the department, the rep in the UN, to Paschal Donoghue and to Leo Varadkar. So, Minister, who else do you know of that she had direct access to? And in that use of soft power, she used her exposure to high-ranking officials to her own ends, for her own gain, and you, Minister, played a central role in that. How can you sit here today and continue to justify your statement that there was no lobbying? Because there was. Very clearly, there was.
Minister.
Okay, well, Deputy, first of all, I give my own department an awful lot more credit than you give them. You're essentially accusing my former Sec-Gen of lying as well. If what you've just outlined is your position. All I can say is the sequence of events as they happened are as I have outlined them today. The Freedom of Information release backs that up. I was the one who mentioned Special Envoy role to Catherine Zappone for the first time. She did not raise it with me and didn't look for updates on that potential role until after the conversation that I had with her. The conversation I had with her was triggered by 2 conversations that I'd had with my Secretary General in relation to discussing whether or not she may be of use to our team in New York.
Okay, Minister, can I just come in there in relation to communication with your Secretary General?
I would accept, Deputy, that my answers to this committee have been somewhat sloppy last week, and that has raised ambiguity and so on, and you're rightly probing hard on those issues, because I should have been
Minister,
a lot clearer last week.
how can you remain to be sloppy in your answers 23 years in government or 23 years in public life?
Well,
have you not learned at this point to not walk into doors? Because after 23 years, one would have expected that to be the very least. But I do want to go back to the communication with the Secretary General. Does it strike you as acceptable that Catherine Zappone was emailing the Secretary General in July of this year from an email account associated with a company that she was a director of, a company that was struck off the company register at her own request in June of 2017? a company called the Centre for Progressive Change?
I simply don't have.
Does that not strike you as odd, Minister?
But all I can say is that Catherine Zappone was in contact with my Secretary General because I had asked him.
Utilising an email address of a company that no longer legally exists.
Deputy, if you could let me finish.
I think the Minister should be allowed an opportunity to reply.
It's not a surprise that Catherine Zappone had email contact and text contact with the Secretary General because I had asked the Secretary General
Minister, my question was
to finalise the arrangements on the back of the advice of the department. I don't know anything about Catherine Zappone's emails.
Do not read the documents.
What email address? I don't know the source of her email address, Deputy. That's a simple and honest answer. You have to ask Catherine Zappone about that.
Here's an idea. Now, Minister, I want to move on to FOI legislation. To me, this is explicitly clear what's happened here, and that there has been a clear exploitation of the weaknesses that exist in the freedom of information, and that was done for nefarious reasons. There can be no other way of interpreting this to any reasonable person. The public and the media were met with a continued wall of silence that started on the 12th of August, when the documents that were released yesterday under FOI began to issue with the acknowledgements of requests, and they continued like a flow from there on. That was an orchestrated and that was a deliberate act to erode public access to information, to how public money is spent and how ministers like yourself and others and government departments operate. Now, this act is designed to contribute to transparency, to openness, but in this case, it was categorically used to limit the release of information in what I believe was an orchestrated plan by you and others in Fine Gael to control the narrative of what happened around the Catherine Zappone appointment. You sought to confuse, to distract and to double down on the underhanded nature of this appointment, which was clearly made in March. In fact, the only actions that
Final minute, Deputy Clerk. You're into the final minute. You haven't asked a question yet.
I want to move on to some questions.
No, Deputy. I would like to respond to that accusation, if I may. My department, the department and the Department of Foreign Affairs officials have worked night and day to publish yesterday the largest ever set of records we've ever published on dfa.ie under the Freedom of Information Act. My officials advised me that we have fully complied with the obligations of the Act and have upheld the Department's long-standing commitment to handling FOI requests transparently and with minimum redaction in compliance with the Act. And I think it's important that I get that on the record.
Okay. Well, while we're talking about compliance with the Act, you said previously... Final
question, Deputy Clerk.
...to this committee. And if that were true, why, and you've admitted this yourself a few minutes ago, that you delete text messages when conversations conclude, why then was a section released under FOI yesterday relating to general chit-chat about Biden election? Why was that not deleted? Why did the data done from the department yesterday have us try to believe that you retain messages from November 2020, you delete messages between you and the Taoiseach?
Yeah. Brief response from the Minister.
Yeah, that's a fair question. The reason I didn't delete the text messages from Catherine Zappone was because I wanted to be, first of all, absolutely transparent, and they were still on my phone. As far as I was concerned, the conversation with Catherine Zappone, which was primarily around this role that we're now discussing, went on for quite a long time. And so what I actually didn't have an obligation to release the texts of around the Biden election and so on under FOI because it doesn't relate to government business. But I wanted to release all texts between myself and Catherine Zappone that I had on my phone, and that is what I did. Unfortunately, I didn't have the text exchange still on my phone with the Taoiseach for reasons that I outlined earlier, and that's why I was very pleased that he published those texts which were consistent in terms of content with what I said to the committee last week.
I'm sure you were absolutely
Thank you, Minister.
Those text messages. But finally, Minister.
Sorry, Deputy Clerk, we've gone over the time. We may have an opportunity later on, Deputy Clerk, to come back.
It is the final part of the question.
Deputy Clerk, please. Our time is exhausted.
Hiding messages, and if you were committed to transparency,
Deputy Clerk, I'm sorry.
Here, Minister, and tell us the last text message you have on it from Leo Bradford and the first text message from the Taoiseach. Pop out your phone there, Minister, and tell us. I'm
sorry, Deputy Clerk. I'm moving on to Deputy Cathal Berry. Maybe an opportunity to answer that question before the end of the meeting if people keep within the guidelines. Thank you. Next is Senator Lynn Boylan. in substitution for Senator O'Donnell. Senator Boylan, you're welcome to this committee.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the Minister. I suppose, look, to start off, I think everybody who's watching this at home would say that it stinks, and I don't think anything we've heard today would change their opinion of that. In fact, I think it's now questions for the Minister for Finance as well as to what his role was in this whole process. But I think for any ordinary Joe or Jane Soap watching on, what they see is somebody who has access to very senior politicians and has availed of that access in order to secure herself employment. And you say that's not lobbying. I think most people at home would say that is lobbying because it's seeking to influence the outcome. So it seems that it's not just Leo that delivers for his friends. It seems that this is the way the Fine Gael do their business. But you said that, so we know from Minister O'Donoghue that Catherine Zappone called him about an intro to Samantha Power, and he suggests that she should talk to you. So I suppose the first question is, Minister, did you make that call or did Catherine Zappone phone you?
So, Deputy, in relation to my exchanges with Catherine Zappone, she texted me on the 22nd of February, which is on the file, and she refers to USAID and the possibility of working with USAID on women, girls, gender equality issues and LGBTQ issues. And then she goes on to say Biden has promised to appoint LGBT folks at high levels and so on. So that was the first contact I had with her since I spoke to her briefly to wish her well when she was leaving Ireland many months earlier. After that, I spoke to my Secretary General on the 24th of February. And at the end of a meeting, which was dealing with other things, I said to her that I had got a text from Catherine Zappone. She's in New York. Do you think she could be an addition to our team in New York? And, you know, would that be a useful possibility? He was positive on that and said, look, you know, he wanted to think about it. And I said, fair enough. On the 26th then, on the 26th, I got a missed call from Catherine Zappone. I hadn't spoken to her. I got a missed call from her and I called her back. And I said to her that I had spoken to the Secretary General about whether or not she could play a useful role in New York. But I had made no mention at that point of the special envoy role because I didn't know anything about it. It was subsequently a few days later when my Secretary General came back to me to say that the Biden administration was moving ahead with the special envoy role. So Minister, just
if I can just, because a lot of that has been repeated, just so when you spoke to Catherine Zappone, did you say to her that it wouldn't be appropriate for you to set up an intro with Samantha Power?
I didn't respond on the Samantha Power thing with her at all. I didn't think that was appropriate, and I certainly don't.
So when you had the conversation on the 26th of February, and the fact that Catherine Zappone had initially reached out to you looking for an intro to Samantha Power, that didn't come up in the conversation.
I told her I had no introduction to make for her to any UN organisation.
So it did come up in the course of the conversation.
Well, she had texted me about it, and she spoke to me about the work that she was doing in UNFPA and her interest in USAID. And I said I didn't have any contacts there, and that I wouldn't be making any introduction to her for her on that.
And at that point, then you discussed the fact that there might be a role for her within the Irish government instead of introducing her to USAID.
No. That's not true, Lynn. That was a conversation previous to that on the 24th. I hadn't spoken to Catherine Zappone when I spoke to Niall Burgess. That's and the text messages and their chronology show that.
Okay, so on the 4th of March then, so things have moved very swiftly between the first phone call you had with Catherine Zappone and your conversation with your Secretary General. Catherine Zappone then mistakenly, you're saying, believes that she was offered a job. But it was subject to a department review of whether such a role was required. And yet she queries the time period of the appointment and what are the next steps that she needs to take. So I think, Minister, for any of us watching, it's like, are you honestly asking us that this is somebody who is a minister who has now mistakenly believed that she's been offered a job because she's asking you, what's the time period of this appointment? What's the next steps? You're saying that the conversation you had was around, a concept role that she would have, that she would engage with the department around the role. So you say it would have been helpful to clarify it at that point that it wasn't a job offer, and you didn't do that. But then in May, Catherine Zappone then asks of any word of the job and a June start date, which I think should have set off alarm bells, I suppose, then within the department that, hang on a second, this woman clearly thinks she has a job and it hasn't been finalised. So I suppose the question is, when was she actually offered the job? And how was that done? Was it done over the phone? Was it done through email? Was it done through a WhatsApp message? How was Catherine Zappone, and on what date was she officially informed that she now had a role as a special envoy?
Well, that was only the week before the government, when papers were sent for my approval from the Secretary General. But I had specifically asked, because I didn't want to get involved in the job spec in relation to expenses or payment or anything like that. It was a matter for the department, which is why I asked the Secretary General to deal with those issues with her, and he did. And in the normal way, a memo would then come to me to sign off. From recollection, I was in Africa at that stage, and it came, and I signed off on it, and then it went to Cabinet, and Cabinet gave approval for this appointment, which I think is important to say before the controversy then erupted afterwards. So this was a government appointment, and it went through the appropriate build up to that in terms of assessments, recommendations, and so forth.
So when you have somebody who's, I suppose, contacting various ministers and the ambassador inquiring about a job that she hasn't actually been formally, at no point did the department think it might be appropriate to go back to Catherine Zappone and go, cool the jets here, Catherine. There's no job as of yet. That hasn't been finalised. We're still going through the process of terms and conditions and whether or not an envoy is needed. So at no point, nobody in the department thought it would be good for us to contact Catherine Zappone and say there isn't a job as of yet.
Well, just to say,
final minute,
as I said at the start, Senator, it would have been helpful, I think, particularly now when we're looking at these texts and with the benefit of hindsight, it would have been helpful if after her enthusiastic texts of the 4th of March, I mean, she was excited about the possibility of the role. If I had gone back to her to say, look, there's no done deal here. We need to go through a process, but I simply have been talking to you about a concept. It would have been helpful if I'd done that, and I didn't. But I think if you look at her texts, at no point have I gone back to her to encourage her or to say things are, concluding or anything like that. If anything, I didn't correspond with her. I simply left this issue in the hands of the department, which was the appropriate place to leave it. But
why would she then, Minister, on the 3rd of March say to you, when she's delighted about this job that she hasn't actually got, that that's great, and I've spoken to Minister Donoghue as well. So if the thing is that she's to be involved in a process, a concept process to explore whether or not there's going to be an envoy, what role would Minister Donoghue have in that? Why would she need to speak to him and tell you that she's spoken to him?
Brief response.
Well, I mean, I don't know the conversations she had with Minister Donoghue. All I know is that she spoke to Minister Donoghue at the end of last year and asked him for advice on career options, and that Pascal mentioned that to me early in the new year, so I wasn't surprised when I got a text from Catherine Zappone reaching out to me.
Thank you, Senator Boylan and Minister.
Apologies, Chair, I was muted there. One final question, Minister. Why is there no record of any communication between you and your Secretary General regarding this appointment? There's no text, there's no emails, there's no minutes of meetings or anything. And is it the case that text messages between you and your Secretary General have also been deleted?
Thank you. Deputy Brady.
Thanks. Thanks, Chair. A couple of very brief points. Minister, on the 19th of July, a text communication between yourself and the Taoiseach when he inquired about the position, the LGB envoy position, you stated that, I spoke to Catherine tonight. She's meeting Niall Burgess on Wednesday to finalise a 12-month contract to be an Irish government special envoy. We now know that that changed to a 2-year position. And Niall Burgess, in his interaction earlier on, he said that a 2-year rather than a 1-year contract will be better for the envoy role. And that was what Catherine Zappone had said to him at that meeting on the 21st. So, Minister, not alone had we Catherine Zappone writing the terms of her own contract, a contract that you had offered her, a position that you had offered her clearly on the 4th of March, we now have Catherine Zappone going into that secretary meeting with the Secretary General and dictating the duration of that contract, which you clearly believed was a 12-month contract. She went in and negotiated a 2-year contract. Minister, when were you made aware of that?
Thank you.
It's bizarre that there are zero communications between your Secretary General and yourself, emails, text messages, minutes, nothing exists.
Thank you.
And the final point I just want to make, Minister, last week you misled the committee in terms of why you deleted text messages. You stated it was for data storage reasons. That quickly changed to then your phone being hacked. So I've very specific questions in relation to that alleged phone hacking. Was that what I deem as a national security, potential national security breach? Why was that not communicated with
Okay, Deputy Brady.
There's national cabinet confidentiality here, and you did not communicate that with the Taoiseach. Why was it not communicated with the Data Protection Commissioner, and why was it not communicated with the Data Protection Officer within the department as well?
Thank you. I'm reverting now to you, Minister, but I'm conscious that many of the supplementary questions are questions, the subject matter of which you've already dealt with. But in any event, I will ask you to deal with the questions on the part of those 5 members as directly and as succinctly as you can over the next few minutes. I thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Chair. I just on Deputy Dick Gannon's question as to whether I thought Catherine Zappone was a suitable candidate to work for the Irish government as a special envoy. I thought she was. Catherine Zappone is not someone who I have a close personal relationship with, but is someone who I have a professional respect for. And I thought, but so too did my Sec-Gen, that potentially she could assist our team in New York. But we had to go through a long process before that could be confirmed, and that's what we tried to do, or that's what we did. In relation to Deputy Clark, why is there no record of texts between the Sec-Gen and me? That's because the Sec-Gen and I speak all the time. His office is below mine, and we talk in person all the time. And
but there's no minutes of those either, Minister.
Yeah, but you know, if you look at the number of times that the Sec-Gen and I spoke about this particular position, there were very few conversations took place, and they were informal conversations by and large. But the records will show that it was the Sec-Gen who then asked for and instructed the department to develop this concept further, and we got a very positive response from other experts in the department in relation to that concept. Deputy Brady asked the question, which is a fair enough question, but I think that former Secretary General Niall Burgess answered it during the course of this meeting. How did it come about that a 12-month contract, which was my understanding until that changed, became a 2-year contract? And there was a clear reasoning around that, and that was supported by the department. They thought that that moving from 12 months to 24 months made sense in terms of the objectives that we had attached to this role. In relation to data storage, look, I mean, I'm somewhat limited in terms of what I can say around that security breach, and I hope that Senator Crockwell will understand that. But all I can say is that after that data security breach that took place, I spoke to my department, I spoke to the Department of Defence, both at the highest level, and got advice and expertise in terms of how I should proceed. And that involved Garda Síochána and the National Cybersecurity Centre. And I'm not sure what more I could have done in relation to that particular issue. And I'm, you know, I certainly have not seen individual reports in relation to that, but I certainly don't think that the Gardaí are likely to release anything.
Sorry, have you released the notice you gave to them?
So I handed my phone over to Garda Síochána, and they took it from there and worked with the department on that. In terms of Deputy Cowan's questions, I can understand why the public, looking at this, political fiasco as it's unfolded, would interpret this in the way that some of you have, as this being lobbying and so on. All I can say is that I got this, initial contact. I regarded that I was trying to develop something that could be an asset to the country in the context of the work that we were doing around foreign policy, particularly through and around the UN, and the department developed that with the support of both myself and the SecGen. Catherine Zappone was hugely enthusiastic about that opportunity and clearly was looking for regular updates in terms of if it was going to materialise and where it was going. That's the way I saw it. But I can, I'm not sure there's ever been an appointment that has had the level of scrutiny that this particular appointment has had. And I can certainly understand why other people would see it differently. But I think the facts show that the account that I've given today is actually what happened. And that's what I'm trying to explain to you today. And once again, can I apologise for the fact that this committee has had to sit a second time on this issue. To be perfectly honest with you, they shouldn't have had to sit even on one sitting on this issue. I should have been able to clarify these issues a lot earlier, and I didn't do that. I regret that, and I thank the committee for their patience and their time.
Thank you, Minister. On behalf of the committee, indeed on my own behalf, I want to, in the first instance, acknowledge your apology to the committee, which was tendered at the outset. But I want to thank you for meeting with us again. And I want to thank you also for dealing with the members' questions in such a comprehensive manner. I want also to thank your officials for attending and for their contributions. If there are any further issues that require any further elaboration arising from this meeting, I would ask that matters be committed to writing and tendered to us in the normal way. And in bringing matters to a conclusion, I want to say to members, I want to thank you for your questions, I want to thank you for your input, your contributions, and say that we will meet again on Tuesday next at 11 a.m. In private to discuss our autumn schedule of meetings and our work programme for the remainder of the year. So thank you, Minister. And members for attending.
Chair, before we finish, I sent you an email last night, Chair, just because I think there's been obviously an awful lot of conversation around former Minister Catherine Zappone, and I think it would be only appropriate that Catherine Zappone would be invited before the committee, because there's still some very, very serious and outstanding issues that I think need clarity, need further explanation and further information. So I think it is incumbent on us now as a committee to correspond to Catherine Zappone and invite her before a committee meeting at the earliest opportunity.
I suggest we deal with this issue in the usual way, and we can have an opportunity at our meeting on Tuesday next. Thank you, members. Thank you, Minister. Until 11.